Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the House Democratic Caucus. It's Tuesday, April 11th, 2023. As usual, I have a few announcements, not many, and then a few bill reports or topic reports. But I'll just get started with the announcements. Just the same as I say pretty regularly, our schedule stays the same. Tomorrow and Thursday will be 1 o'clock on the floor and 9:30 on Friday, 10 on Tuesdays. That's going to continue for the time being. The speaker reminded us this morning that to continue to remind you to keep a listen out for token sessions. They'll start later on in the month for Mondays, but you don't obviously need to be here on a token session. So but just keep track of that. We're still working on a harassment prevention training. I've mentioned that here before. The speaker is committed to doing this still this session. Having a little hard time getting a facilitator and a trainer facilitator and a timing situation where we can do it all at the same time. But we are plan on it. We are still trying to do it for this session and are working sort of on a bigger scale for what we're going to do over the next session as well. So I just wanted to remind you about that. There are more people in the building lately. I know everybody's noticed that. There are more events going on, and we just wanted to make sure that everybody is reminded that despite all of the things that are pulling us in every different direction, we really do need you on the floor. So if you are in the building and we are on the floor, please come to the floor and be in your seats unless there's some absolute reason why you cannot, and then you should let us know why you're not. And last thing, just we're still holding some dates for veto session potentially and end of session. The veto session dates are the same, 20, 21, 22 as a hold in case we need it. And May 12th is still our target adjournment date, but do not hold us to that. You never know. Okay, so that was it on my announcements. And I have a few folks, I'm going to look right here, and on the edge of the seat is Representative Lanfer, who's going to give us a little update on ARPA funds and keeping track of them and reviewing them. Thank you.
Thank you. And another coffee. This coffee tastes so good. So your House Appropriations Committee has had a very nice week. The budget is over in the Senate and the daffodils are out and it's sun shining, and what could go wrong? So so we've now kind of turned a page to a little bit. We worked a little bit last week on things that we don't always have extended time, but curiosity, because many of the members on House Appropriations are fairly new to the committee. So we had like 3 hours update on pensions, which was fabulous. We had almost 2 to 3 hours on housing and what's going on across the state. So, you know, taking every opportunity to educate ourselves to the next level on and go a little deeper on things. But come Thursday, one of the things that I had been anxious to sink my teeth into, so to speak, was where are we with the ARPA dollars? We put last year and the year before within the Appropriations Committee and through the members of the House and the Senate, there is $1 billion that was allocated. It's all out there. We've put it on the line. And so the question we have for ourselves and for everybody else is, what is happening with all that money? Where is it? How much is being used? What is it being used for? And so I can give you just a little bit of an update. We spent some time on the bigger picture, and we want to do even more so. So what we learned on Thursday, both from our JFO and from Doug Farnham, who is the Deputy Secretary of the Agency of Administration, who's pretty much his whole job is just make sure that he's got his pulse on everything that's happening with the ARPA dollars. So $1 billion have gone out. Now this is the ARPA dollars, and those have been around a little bit longer. The CFR, those original relief dollars that we got, that bill, it was all done and gone. Okay. This was that second billion that came into Vermont. So the update on that right now is 40% has been obligated. So that means 60% of that $1 billion has not yet been obligated, and it needs to be obligated in order to not be clawed back to the federal government by December of 24. We have a year and a half. So we need some eyes on what's left. Where is it? Is it going to meet that challenge of being obligated or not? As you saw in the budget, through some of the hard work in the House Commerce Committee, DFR discovered that there was at least 10 million that we could comfortably take back of the ARPA money and redeploy it in a new way. So your House Appropriations Committee, along with hopefully all the members, are going to have an opportunity that take a look underneath the hood a little further around where are we with that. Myself, and I'm sure others, would prefer to be a part of this process of staying engaged and knowing where things are going. And if there's a problem with it being obligated, that we have plenty of time to thoughtfully respond and be partnership with the administration on where that would be. I do not want to see us come back in here in January and February of 24 and sort of a hurry frenzy of like, how do we use this? I think we have an opportunity to kind of keep a look at it. So the next steps on that right now is taking a look, actually under their advice from the administration, that because the economic development and workforce investments, or at least outlay, there's many programs. I think there's like 58 different programs with the ARPA dollars, and they could use some more eyes on them to see if they're meeting that. So we're going to schedule some more testimony this week, just specifically around those programs to start off with. But welcome anybody else's eyes on there if you've got time. That's what we're up to. Oh. Madam.
Questions. So just while you're waiting for the microphone, anyone who has questions, raise your hand or stand up and get the microphone and introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Representative Robin Chestnut Tangerman. Just a clarification question. The 40% that has been obligated, does that include this year's budget or not?
That was the 40% that was obligated was a part of last year's.
Okay.
So that was that $1 billion went out with all the categories and how it was to be used would have been in last year's budget.
And so
and
if,
even
if
before
this
that.
year,
So this
roughly
year,
how much is in this year's budget?
this year we redeployed or redirected 10 million of it. There was a program called the I'm not forgetting the title, but it was really about businesses to apply. If you were an employer and you had employees that were out with COVID, you could write and get reimbursement for that person's time that was out with COVID related. The budget before, I can't remember if it was in this last year or the year before, had put $15 million in that program to be able to respond to businesses to access if they needed that relief.
Right.
And we found out that very few have actually applied to the tune of $15 million, only $368,000 in applications. So we felt very comfortable taking 10 million, redeploying it in this budget in a different way.
Thank you. That wasn't really my question.
Okay, all right. How much in?
So of the 60% that was left at the end of last year, how much of that is included in this year's budget?
So there was nothing left last year. It was all put out there to the administration and to the budget. And all 1 billion. It's just now we need to do accountability of what is it, how is it going? Is it getting out the door? I think Robin might want to,
Okay.
the other Robin
Yes.
is gonna, my vice chair will help clarify.
So I think there's three things, and it is confusing, and we're getting, so there's allocating the money, there's obligating the money, and there's spending the money.
Yeah.
So in last year's budget, and then maybe the previous 2 years, I can't even
Yeah.
remember now, we have allocated the entire $1 billion. It has not, but only 40% of it has been obligated. And 100% needs to be obligated by December of 2024. It further needs to be spent by December of 2026. So does that clarify? Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That's
Thank you. So obligated is not enough to getting it actually done. It's going to have to be spent by 26.
Hi, Representative Ella Chapin, East Montpelier. So my question is about towns. And, I'm witnessing one of my towns trying to figure out how to, I guess I'm not exactly obligate, I think might be the right word, to certain projects, ARPA funding. So that's money that's, from the state has been obligated to towns. Is that the right language?
Almost. Towns had ARPA that came to them directly from the
Okay.
feds. So they have received, every town has received an amount that went directly to them.
Not through the state.
But then, so they have that, which is a very flexible fund for them. And that they can do a lot of different things with them, far more flexible than the state's ARPA dollars can. But then the state received ARPA dollars for all these programs, many programs that we put out there, small business stuff, municipalities, water programs. So those ARPA dollars are like grants or programs that a town could write for. So there's 2 ways that a town. So that was part of the rural assistance, helping towns actually write and access those other ARPA dollars that the state has, or directly to the feds.
So I guess I'm just raising awareness that a lot of our towns also have to figure out how and when
Yes,
to allocate and then spend down dollars. But it sounds like that is not necessarily part of the state's.
This particular piece that I'm talking about is the 1 billion that came to the state, and how we've turned it around, like Representative Shai has mentioned, that we have allocated it to 2 things. And now we're overseeing the process, or checking in with them. How is that going? Are they actually obligating those dollars to projects? Are those projects being done? Sometimes we found out, Representative Squirrel, if you're in the room, even in the shortest time of getting the spreadsheets in front of us, different projects that were canceled, that the administration cannot move ARPA dollars from one program that we've allocated to without legislative action. So within a moment, he found $1 million out of something that was canceled. We asked, can you redeploy that without our action? And the answer was no. So we are here to help.
Questions?
I see Representative Austin. Hi.
Representative Austin from Colchester. Could you just clarify the matching funds and the kind of information that's being put out there by the administration about not having funds to match federal fundings, that we're spending that money now?
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
You're welcome. I'm going to take this giant leap, and I'm going to make an assumption that I think I know what you're asking for, because that's like this subject that's over here. In the governor's recommendation, he had reserved some general fund dollars for out years, and like up to 2027 for some to match federal formula funds in the transportation world. In this budget that you passed, FY24 had support for this year's match to the tune of 10.9 million for transportation. So last year we had 22 million, this year there's 10.9. The general fund has now been shoring up the bottom of the transportation fund in order to have them meet their obligations. We have done that this year, but in the future years, we said we'll keep working on the funding source, Part of that is helpful is the DMV fees, which was also passed, but that's not for this year's dollar. That's for the future. And it'll get there, but not all the way. There's still more work to do. Does that help? So this year, we fully take access of the formula dollars. There's some federal programs that we don't always, we don't write for all the grants that maybe are opportunity, but Vermont has always made sure that we fully accessed the formula dollars. So Representative Austin and others over time, the transportation fund has seen a deterioration of the state funds because of a lot of actions, which I won't go into now, but the gasoline tax going down for a lot of good reasons, the amount coming in. So in order to make sure that you can fully match, you have to have enough state dollars to do that. So in the new infrastructure bill, the state of Vermont will now have an opportunity to access 30% more than we had in the past. So we've been struggling with lower dollars in the T fund, and now they just raised the opportunity. So it's going to be even tighter to get there. Okay.
Great question. Not seeing any more questions. There's
Representative Alice Emmons, Springfield, and I do have a follow-up as well on our federal state match for the federal dollars. It also is included in our capital bill. Our capital bill does a 2-year budget, not a 1-year. And we have met our full match that is needed for the infrastructure bill, the federal infrastructure bill, for FY24 and FY25. We have also put money in for the regular water, drinking water and stormwater and wastewater projects, as well as meeting the federal match for those projects in that area. So also, I think folks need to be aware that the federal dollars on the infrastructure bill are only available on a year-by-year basis. So if we put the full money up front for 4 years, we're not getting those 4 years of federal dollars in one fell swoop. So you have to match it year by year. And we have met our match in the capital budget for FY24 and FY25.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's right. Putting more money in won't increase the number of projects that can get done. We're full on that. And I'm sure we'll both be around, hopefully, for the future ones. Okay, great. All right.
Yes, so if you have any other questions, please, or questions or feedback or comments, please go to Representative Lanfer or anyone on appropriations, or maybe anybody on corrections institutions too. Okay, or come to leadership. All right, up next, I'm going to go, Representative Houghton is going to give us an update on, it is S37.
Hi, everyone. So S37, which is an act relating to access to legally protected healthcare activity and regulation of healthcare providers, is the companion bill to H89 that passed out of this body earlier this session on a vote of 130 to 13. H89 dealt with litigation. S37 deals with a lot of things, but the primary is disciplinary action. So I don't think I have to tell everyone, you all read the news. There are states in the country who are passing legislation about legally protected healthcare. And so we feel it's imperative to protect our providers in Vermont. Some of the statistics, just so you know, about half of US states have already or expected to enact abortion bans or other limits on the procedure. And more than a third of the 150,000 transgender youth aged 13 to 17 in the US live in the 15 states that have restricted or banned access to best practice medical care for transgender youth or are considering legislation to do so. We discussed this a bit in committee the other day. Our established norms are out the door. So we really need to move forward with this. So some of the things the bill does. So like I said, it protects clinicians against disciplinary action based on providing legally protected healthcare activities here in Vermont in our borders. So if we have a provider who has a license and it's in their scope of practice to provide legally protected healthcare activities, another state, we will attempt to protect them from another state trying to discipline them. We also, as you know, the Healthcare Committee is all about compacts this year. So there's also language asking for interstate medical licensing compact, nursing compact, and others to be examined to ensure that no one can get to our providers through those compacts. We are protecting healthcare data from disclosure and legal proceedings. We are ensuring that legally protected healthcare is covered by Medicaid and our insurance agencies, insurance health plans, and actually they have been doing it for many years. We are hopefully allowing pharmacists to prescribe emergency contraceptive and permit pharmacies and colleges and universities to make non-prescription emergency contraception and other available by vending machines. We are requiring Vermont's public institutions of higher education to report on their students' access to reproductive and gender affirming healthcare. And we are also establishing a new and unfair deceptive act regarding pregnancy centers to ensure that we prohibit them from false and misleading advertisement. So that's generally what we're looking at the bill to do. We have testimonies scheduled every day this week with the hope that we will pass it out on Friday at the latest Tuesday, and it'll be on the floor next week. So I'm happy to answer any questions. There's always one. Yep.
Hi, Jonathan Williams, Berry City. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on the false or misleading advertisements piece. Sure. And what exactly does that encompass? Thank you.
Sure. So what we're learning is that in Vermont, consumer protection really revolves around a payment for a service. And when Vermonters go to crisis pregnancy centers, many of them do not charge for those services. They receive donations, and that's how they provide the care that they provide. And so we are adding a provision specific to pregnancy centers to say that the payment doesn't need to be there for consumer protection, and that you must be forthcoming with the services you actually provide, whether or not you are really a medical center, and whether or not you truly provide or refer for abortions. Anything else? Great. Oh, there's one over there. I believe we have about 7. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Houghton, and the Healthcare Committee. If you all have questions, make sure you go see them. Up next, we're going to go to GovOps. Representative McCarthy is going to speak about S32, which is ranked choice voting. And then when he's done, we have one more committee.
All right, so I had asked Majority Leader Long for a minute to let folks know that we are taking some testimony later this week from a number of experts and stakeholders about S32, which is an act that would kick off having ranked choice voting in presidential primaries. So it also does a couple of other things. So as it came over to us from the Senate, it would have ranked choice voting as an opt-in for municipalities. That's something we'll be looking at in detail. It sets up a study committee to talk about voter education, training of clerks, election security, the technical requirements to expand and other things to expand ranked choice voting into elections beyond the presidential primary. We've talked about ranked choice voting as it's come up. It exists right now in Burlington for city council races. And we did that through a charter change last biennium of bringing that back after a period where they had it, had rescinded it, and then voted to have it again in a slightly different form. One of the things that's come up a lot is the method of how ranked choice voting tabulation happens. So the hair method or instant runoff voting, as a lot of people think about it, is the most common. And we're going to be taking a lot of testimony about that methodology and how the tabulation happens. But one of the reasons why this bill focuses on presidential primaries is because there's that one question on the ballot. So it's kind of an isolated election. And so as sort of a test for a statewide use of a new tabulation and voting method, it's an opportunity to do that without potential confusion. And it seems like there's some support from the Municipal Clerks and Treasurers Association on that. So we'll be doing our homework on that, but I just know that this has been an ongoing conversation as we think about accessibility and depolarization and methods to make sure that our democracy is as strong as it can be. So I just wanted to have the opportunity to give the folks a heads up as we'll be taking a lot of testimony that may spark conversations throughout the building later on this week.
Thanks, Rob and Shai. Is this ranked choice by party, or is it going to be all the presidential primary candidates on one ballot and you rank them regardless of party?
So the bill envisions that this will still be just within each party's primary. That's a great, and also envisions that once candidates reach the threshold, so the Democratic Party and the Republican Party actually have different methods of allocation of their delegates today. So right now, Democratic Party is proportional once you reach 15%. The Republican presidential primary is a winner take most delegate selection, because what you're doing when as a voter you vote in the primary is you're voting for the party's delegates to be allocated at their convention to that candidate, right? So we're nominating the delegates to support that. So yes, it would still be separate is the simple answer to that question, but it also contemplates all of the details of both of the elections and how ranked choice voting will sort of work in each one.
Representative McCarthy, Scott Campbell, representative from St. Johnsbury. Just wondering if the tabulation machines that towns have can handle this.
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So the scan ballot, the vote tabulation machines that we use that scan the ballots that most of us are used to, they can be programmed to accommodate that. So we're in the process now of the tail end of rolling out all of the updated machines that came through federal grant money and the efforts of the Secretary of State's office over the last few years, so that by the time we get to 2028, all of those will be in place and would be programmed. The bill as it was introduced envisioned instituting IRV for the presidential primary in 2024. The Secretary of State's office very quickly said, I think logistically that may be difficult, and here's why. And this is one of the main reasons why it got pushed out to 2028.
Hi, Julia Andrews, Westford. I think what I heard you say at the beginning is that it would be an opt-in situation for towns to choose this for the presidential primary, and no.
No, so the bill as it came over to us includes an opt-in for towns for local elections, similar to what Burlington is doing right now today. It would say, okay, if your town wants to opt in, this is the process, and this is how you would use ranked choice voting for local elections. If we pass this, the presidential primary piece would just be statewide, no opting in or out.
Let's see, any other questions? If you do have any, you know who to go to. Representative McCarthy or anybody on GovOps? Thank you, Representative McCarthy. Okay, last but not least, we have the Judiciary Committee who's going to speak about two bills, S3 and S36. I don't know whether you're coming alone, Representative Lalonde, or whether you're bringing folks with you, but the podium is yours. Always teamwork. Okay.
So I will be, hi everyone, Representative Angela Arsenault from Williston. I will be talking about S3, which is, maybe you know, maybe you've heard of it, an act relating to prohibiting paramilitary training camps. So I'll start by saying I knew this and I tried to find the best source to share what I knew with all of you, that the U.S. intelligence community has identified what they call transnational, racially and ethnically motivated extremists as the most lethal threat to U.S. persons and interests. And according to this article on thehill.com, that is shorthand for domestic terrorism. Domestic terrorism might also be referred, paramilitary training is a part of domestic terrorism and often conducted by racially and ethnically motivated groups such as white supremacy groups. So establishing that, I will share, I prepared some, I'm going half prepared and half winging it. So this is the prepared part. S3 would prohibit paramilitary training camps in Vermont. The bill has two pieces. And the first thing to know is that S3 writes into statute that which is already true based on both the Vermont Constitution and the US Constitution. Article 16 of the Vermont Constitution states the following, quote, that the people have a right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state, and as standing armies in time of peace are dangerous to liberty, they ought not to be kept up, and that the military should be kept under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power. That subordination to a civil power piece is quite important and telling. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 12 of the U.S. Constitution states that Congress shall have the power to raise and support armies. So perhaps I'll say it again with a different emphasis. Congress shall have the power to raise and support armies. This makes it clear that there is no authority granted in the Constitution, regardless of amendment that some might point to. There is no authority in the Constitution for private citizens to form a militia free from government oversight. So 29 states already prohibit unauthorized militias through state statute. Vermont is the only state in New England that has not yet done so. And 25 states prohibit specific paramilitary activity with language that is essentially the same or very similar to the language in S3. So on to the language and the winging it part. The first section of this bill prohibits teaching, training, or demonstrating. You probably don't want me to read word for word, but just so you have an idea of the scope, teaching, training, or demonstrating to any other person the use, application, or making of a firearm, explosive, or incendiary device capable of causing injury or death, or techniques capable of causing injury or death to persons if, an important word, if there ever was one, the person knows or reasonably should know that the teaching, training, or demonstrating is intended to, we're going to propose a change to the Senate language, which was will be unlawfully employed. And we will be looking to change that to is intended to be employed or in use of, employed in a civil disorder or in furtherance of a civil disorder. So similar language in the very next paragraph prohibits assembling to teach or train for all of those things that I just mentioned. So there's the first paragraph prohibiting teaching, training, or demonstrating. The second paragraph saying, and you also can't get together with other people to do these things. Importantly, the definition of civil disorder means any public disturbance involving acts of violence by an assemblage of two or more persons that causes an immediate danger of or results in damage or injury to the property or person of any other individual. So this section goes on to explicitly exempt certain types of activities, specifically lawful activity engaged in by students at Norwich University, a military university. Certain activities similar to what I just read that might be engaged in by groups of law enforcement officers. And then any activity undertaken without knowledge of or intent to cause or further a civil disorder that is intended to teach or practice self-defense or self-defense techniques. So specifically called out in the bill are karate clubs, self-defense clinics, and similar lawful activity. So I think there's a very clear effort being made to keep lawful things lawful and to be very clear about the intent, the specific activity that is being prohibited. And then the second main portion of the bill, importantly, creates civil enforcement or injunctive relief. So if the Attorney General or state's attorney, which we've learned isn't likely to happen, but we're keeping the door open to state's attorneys, have reason to believe that a person is violating the statute, they can make it stop, which is an important piece. And I think that's it. Winging it and prepared. I think I can take questions. Maybe I should look to Martin and make sure it's question time. Are we good?
Thank you, Peter Anthony, Barry City. I'm pretty confident the committee is aware there was a recent split appellate decision in a situation that was used to prosecute the January 6th invaders. And the issue turned on the language in the federal statute that had to do with interrupting the functioning of government. And I commend that phrase for consideration in the inclusion of intent rather than simply, as you read, trying to essentially inflict bodily harm. It may be a function that is impaired, not just personal injury. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Hi, Julia Andrews. I think you've done a great job and perhaps answered this question, but in the interest of my constituents, I feel compelled to ask what impact, if any, this would have on legal gun ranges.
No impact.
Hi, Mark Mahaly, Callis. Angela, this is great work. Thank you. Could you read again just the language that it says intent?
Yes. I want to make sure I captured just the.
It's with intent too, as I remember, but.
Oh, so that would be in the civil. Yeah. So, well, let me pull out the most recent draft, not the one with all my notes on it. So the way it reads currently in the most recent draft, a person shall not teach, train, or demonstrate all of those things if the person knows or reasonably should know that the teaching, training, or demonstrating is intended to be used or in furtherance of a civil disorder.
One thought I have is just I like that knows or reasonably should know, but when you put the word intent in, you are creating an additional defense. And litigating intent might be more difficult, and you might think about just striking that. And so it would be reasonably knows or should know that it will be. I just raised that issue for you.
Well,
Have you had, and you might, I'm sure you took testimony or you will be taking testimony from the AG's office, and they'll probably be much better equipped than I to address that issue.
no, I appreciate the note, and will be was the original language in the bill that we got from the Senate, and we actually we would like to change that language. We changed it to intended to be because will be might be a higher bar, would be high. Yeah. Thank you.
Robin Chestnut Tangerman, Rutland Bennington District. And my question in the penalty section, the Senate originally had, I believe, a $5,000 penalty.
Correct.
Was raised to $100,000 and then went back to $5,000. And I wonder if you had discussed this at all and the possibility of raising it back up, because some of these organizations are very well funded. The one in my district, the operator says that he spent $1.6 million on improvements, paid a $56,000 fine, and is facing another $50,000 fine with no apparent damage. And I think in a situation like that, a $5,000 fine is laughable. And just wonder about the committee's discussion around this.
Yes, you're correct. We did discuss this point, and we did choose so far. We haven't voted on it yet, of course, but we did choose to keep it at 5,000 as the Senate had reverted back to 5,000. It's 5 years or 5 years in prison, not more than $5,000 or both. And our conversation centered mainly understanding perfectly well what you're saying, that this is really a very small price to pay for some groups. However, it's in line with the 5-year felony penalties. It's just kind of keeping it in line with the rest of statute.
Hi, Kirk White from Bethel. It's probably a reflection of my social circle, but the exemptions in there, it talks about, it makes exemption for self-defense groups and stuff like that, martial art clubs and things. But I'm wondering about reenactors who are learning their firearm skills, not for self-defense, or groups like the Society for Creative Anachronisms, people specifically learning how to smack each other with swords. Is that an exemption in there? I mean, it's a hobby. I don't think they're going to storm any buildings with their swords.
Yeah, I think. Wait, did you just say Society for Anachronisms? I love whatever you just said. I want to hear it again.
Society for Creative Anachronisms.
Creative Anachronisms. Yes. God, that's the phrase I didn't know I needed in my lexicon. Yes, I believe that would be covered under subsection C3. Any activity undertaken without knowledge of or intent to cause or further a civil disorder that is intended to teach or practice self-defense or self-defense techniques. I know, maybe that isn't self-defense, but I think that you might be covered under, it's really that intent or knowledge of the intent to cause a civil disorder.
Yeah. That was just my concern, I guess, was that, the intent is, that piece is great, but then the little piece that then specifically calls it out for self-defense may weaken or make that more ambiguous. So that was my concern.
one last question and then we're going to go. We still have two more things to report on.
Hi, Jonathan Williams, Berry City. I'm curious if this bill encompasses denial of service attacks with the intent to shut down the legislature. For example, we've seen in instances this year where if we're unable to stream floor proceedings, then we will not conduct the business of the state. And thus, I'm curious if there were entities that were training persons to engage in virtual online terrorism. Would this bill address that? Thank you.
I think you just drafted another bill. It's not covered by this bill, but I like where your head's going. Legislating for the future.
All right, thanks. We got one more bill.
Martin Malone, representative from South Burlington. And I'm going to discuss S36, which addresses assaults against healthcare workers, primarily in hospitals and emergency departments. We've heard from a number of witnesses explaining that the level of violence in EDs has been increasing over the last several years, even before the pandemic. And healthcare workers are reaching out to us to help out in whichever way we can. And this is really, it's actually somewhat incremental, as many things that we do. And it is to make it a little easier for law enforcement to be able to be involved in a hospital setting. And there are a lot of restrictions on that. So, but currently, generally to arrest somebody, law enforcement needs to have a warrant. But there are certain exceptions to that under what's called Rule 3 of the criminal rules, criminal procedure rules. That allows a warrantless arrest in certain situations. If there's a felony, for instance. If the law enforcement officer observes a misdemeanor actually happening, they can also arrest without a warrant. What this bill would do is there are some exceptions to the observing a misdemeanor. And this would add the situation where there has been violence and assault, threatening behavior, disorderly conduct in a hospital that law enforcement hasn't witnessed. This would allow law enforcement to come to be called and come to the hospital and arrest whoever that person is and remove them from the hospital with some exceptions, which I'll get to in a second. Otherwise, if the officer generally, if they just haven't observed the misdemeanor, they would not arrest the person, but just give them a citation to appear in court at some future date and let the person go. So there are two situations in the hospital. One is where you don't have a patient. It's a family member. It's somebody who is in the hospital who's not there for treatment. And this bill would definitely allow law enforcement to come out, arrest the person, remove the person from the facility. It's a little more complicated if it's a patient. If it's a patient, the law enforcement officer may not remove the patient from the hospital unless they've been stabilized. And we've made that, and actually the biggest change that we have in what we received from the Senate is that was implied. It was implicit that, and all of law enforcement that has testified to us have indicated that they would not remove somebody if they are still being treated. But that's not really what the bill said. And we wanted to make that clear that if it's a patient who has become violent, law enforcement can come there, presumably can arrest the person, but can't remove the person. And we also learned from law enforcement that more often than not in that situation, the law enforcement officer will come there, will calm the situation down, and very well may not arrest. And if they do arrest, the charges aren't brought. So this also has a report, which I think is actually probably more helpful. It's a report that our friends in healthcare are going to look very closely at, I'm sure, that would be done by the Vermont Program for Quality in Healthcare, and would really look at all the different other ways that hospitals can address violence, such as training in de-escalation techniques, sufficient staffing, et cetera. So that's the other component of the bill. Are there any questions?
Chip Troiano from Standard. Now, will this increase penalties as a result of these? Is this part of the bill? Is that, I thought you mentioned felonies when you first started.
Right. I was just explaining how one can arrest without a warrant. There's an exception,
Okay.
and that is an arrest for somebody who's committed a felony.
Okay.
But no, this doesn't change any penalties.
Doesn't
This-
change
This
the
just
penalties.
allows a warrantless arrest in these certain situations in the hospital.
Okay, and the person, if it's a patient, cannot be removed while being treated. Is that what I heard also?
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, if anyone has any questions about either S3 or S36, please see either Representative Arsenault or Representative Lalonde or anyone on the Judiciary Committee. We have one last, it's not a bill report, but it's an announcement, something that Representative Stevens wanted to share with you. So, thank you. Public service.
Good morning still. Tom Stevens, Chair of Housing in General. I just wanted to notify people two things, good news, bad news. First, the selection committee for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission chose the commissioners about a week and a half ago. And they are Mia Schultz, who is very much involved in the Rutland NAACP, Melody Mackin, who is an Indigenous woman who, educator, lecturer, and Patrick Standen, who is a professor of disability law at St. Michael's College. And in general, it's the fabulous set of 3 commissioners, and they're about to undertake their work. A week after they were notified, or that we were notified that they had been named, they received death threats. And so I just want to point out that there was in the aftermath of an incident down in Brattleboro where a client at a shelter attacked and killed a staff member, and it was a person of color attacking a white person. There's been a number of incredibly dangerous and racist emails that have gone out, and some of you may have received them in passing, but there were direct threats made to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I just want you to remember that we don't have a direct line into the Truth and Reconciliation Commission anymore. That's the way that it was set up. If you do hear from them, the chief of police here at the Capitol Police knows about it. The state police know about it. The FBI knows about it because it crosses state lines. But just if you hear something, please report something. I feel very protective of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission because the work that went to create it came through our committee, and never in a million years, though in retrospect, I don't know how I didn't think that they would be attacked so soon after being named. But if we're to expect work to come out of them over the next 3 years, that's positive for our communities, then I think we just need to be aware of what's happening on this basis. And I just wanted to share that with you. Again, good news, bad news. Thank you.
All right, that was it for us today. So have a great week, everyone. Thank you all for being here.